Good evening. Thank you for joining. Tonight is Tuesday, September the 8th. This is lesson 27, Practical English. My name is Darcy. And you're watching part 2 of the 2-part series looking at modern art, movements in modern art. In the previous lesson, the one that we did last week, we looked at the Impressionist painters, Manet, Monet, Degas, Seurat, Cezanne, Van Gogh. These were the late 19th century French painters that boldly decided to change the conventions existing in the professional art world. Tonight we are looking at what came after. Tonight is the second part in a series presenting a timeline of Western artistic cultural movements with a focus on painters and their works from the end of the 19th century up until the present day. And here are some names of those art movements: Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Expressionism, Abstract art, Surrealism, and Urban art. So part 2 is looking at popular individual modern art painters that followed after the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. So if you missed the first part of this lesson series, I would encourage you after this lesson to go and watch part 1, the recording of part 1. Tonight we will be looking at these artists: Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Edvard Munch, Frida Kahlo, Gustav Klimt, Alphonse Mucha, Wassily Kandinsky, Jackson Pollock, Salvador Dali, Alex Gray, M.C. Escher, and the anonymous artist known as Banksy. So yes, the timeline of modern art. We haven't really looked at classical art at all. We did have a lesson on classical architecture, looking at the evolution of architectural styles from the beginning of civilization up until the end of the classical period, or the beginning of the modern era. If you look at this timeline presented here, you can see 11th century Gothic, followed by 13th century Renaissance. That goes all the way up until 1860, or the late 19th century. That's the classical era. And then following from that, you had the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. And this is considered from, the 18th and 19th century onward as the modern era. Modern simply means the era of technology and machines. Now, of course, we live in a new kind of an era, an information era. But the modern era defines the beginning of society, civilization, particularly Western, the Western European society from the 18th century up until mid 20th century. So, technology, industrialism, capitalism changed society, changed the thinking. The thinking changed from religious, right, where the church was the leading institution, to just post-religious, where secular, I should say, secular humanist, secular humanism, where the prevailing belief was that human society, mankind, was the was responsible for his own destiny, okay, or human beings were responsible for their own destiny, and they were free to live as they chose, basically. You had the revolutionary movements, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and with that came all of these philosophical ideas about freedom, liberty, self-determination, and free will and choice. Okay, so all of these ideas sort of belong in the backdrop or belong in the background of what was happening during this time period. So at the end of the lesson, I will be providing a QR code, a link where you can join the study group, where I have uploaded this worksheet. In every lesson, I provide a worksheet with 24 terms for you to look up, translate, know the meaning. These are words that are important in this lesson. Now, I'm not actually going to go through these terms. If you'd like to get this worksheet, feel free to contact me at the end of this lesson through the WeChat group that I will link you to at the end of the lesson. Okay? So, without further ado, again, thanks for joining tonight, and let's begin. So again, to define modern art, it's quite a complex topic because the modern artists were kind of individualists, radicals. They did their own thing, and you had all of these different movements cropping up in different areas at the same time, or over the span of time, and each movement was trying to come up with its own unique style or technique of philosophy. So there are many dozens of modern art movements. We want to look at 12 artists tonight belonging to 8 movements respectively. And these movements, these terms that define these movements, it's open to interpretation, but they have something to say about something that the artist was trying to convey in their art or portray or depict, okay? So modern art depicts work produced after 1860 up until about the 1970s. What follows modern art can be called postmodern or contemporary art, the art of the day, or something else. Traditional art is more easily recognizable and often considered to be more beautiful or appealing because the subjects are portrayed realistically using formal artistic techniques. The main difference between modern art and traditional art is that modern artists intend to experiment and find new ways of expressing their ideas. The notion of what defines art and what function it should serve is intentionally challenged by these artists. So classical traditional art had evolved, developed over hundreds of years, using formal techniques taught in art academies by art masters. So if you wanted to be a professional artist, you had to graduate from an art academy, and the only way that you could be accepted in the art world is if your work was judged and approved and put on display in these art salons or these art galleries, and they had to adhere to the standards. There was a strict set of criteria that the artists had, and one of those was that they had limited range of what was considered appropriate subject matter. In other words, what passes for art today is, again, it's very open to interpretation, and perhaps for that reason we don't have too many very popular artists anymore. At least in terms of the visual arts, fine arts, painting and sculpture. There's no set of criteria that artists can really aspire to in order to be considered talented artists or relevant artists, let's say. I'm sure that, in some cities they do have their contemporary arts scene, and perhaps, in a few decades, art historians and art theorists will look at the artists of today and choose a few that sort of belong in the in the canon of the evolution of Western art. That's often the case. Many of these artists living that we'll be talking about tonight, many of them lived in obscurity. For example, we talked about Van Gogh in the previous lesson. Van Gogh was able to sell some of his paintings, or many of his paintings. He was able to sell many of his paintings and have his works displayed in exhibitions. But he wasn't considered to be a great master until many years after his death, and that's true for a few of these artists that we'll be looking at tonight. They spent their lives working, and were not recognized as the great artists that we recognize them for today. So this is the challenge of being an artist, having to come up with something original and something that stands the test of time. It's no longer good enough just to be a talented painter, able to depict a scene realistically. What's expected in the modern art world is to have some sort of technique or style or set of themes that can shock and provoke art critics and art collectors. We'll look at a few videos. We'll look at two videos to get a better idea of that. Now, the Impressionists that we talked about in the previous lesson came about, at the end of the 19th century, 1860 to about 1890. So these Impressionist painters were the first among the modern artists to challenge traditional conventions and paint in the style that they wanted to paint in. And this allowed artists growing up in that period, post-Impressionists, to carry on this idea of not necessarily painting to represent reality, but rather to explore some of the internal, psychological, emotional aspects of art. Okay? Since the Impressionists and the liberation of the art world from conventional styles, innumerable types of art movements have sprung up in different parts of the world among different groups of artists. The names of these movements denote something about the style that the artists used, as well as the philosophy or underlying theme that the artist tried to portray. As artists experimented with new styles and new definitions of art, more artists came to be known for producing art in multiple mediums. A medium is painting, sculpture, photography, or multimedia, mixed media, collage, performance art, photography, and film. So modern artists didn't just paint or sculpt, they did everything. Whereas artists of the past strived to perfect their technique and craft for showcase in an art salon, it was common for modern artists to have their own personal exhibitions showcasing completely new and often unusual artistic works. And here we're looking at a painting by Marcel Duchamp, which is, one of the first examples of the Cubist, abstract, expressionist style of painting. It was not well received when it was first displayed. People really didn't like it. But it was tremendously influential for artists that we know today, such as Pablo Picasso. So what are those art movements that we'll be exploring tonight? Many modern art movements have evolved over the course of time. In this lesson, we will examine artists known for their works from these movements. The Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. Impressionism and Post-Impressionism is a style or movement of painting originating in France in the 1860s, characterized by a concern with depicting the visual impression of the moment, especially in terms of shifting effect of light and color. So again, when you are looking at those Impressionist painters, Monet, Manet, Degas, Cezanne, Van Gogh, the artists of that period, this is what they were striving to achieve, rather than focusing on like completing a work and perfecting every single detail. It was good enough for them to capture the moment, to give the audience an impression of the scene, and using new techniques of painting and a choice of color palette that kind of blurred everything to give the visual effect of light, and movement, I suppose. Expressionism. So you have Impressionism and Expressionism. An impression is a feeling or a mental picture that you get from someone or something. Expression is a way of being, or a style of communicating. Like people can express themselves through the clothing they wear, through the music that they listen to, through their personality. Okay, so that's what expressionism is, and that's what expression is. And expressionism is a style of painting, music, or drama in which the artist or writer seeks to express the inner world of emotion rather than external reality. So after Impressionism, the Impressionist artists, the Expressionists wanted to, I suppose, rebuke the Impressionist style. They said they were bored of it, and they wanted to take the Impressionist style of painting to the next level by sort of abandoning the notion of depicting a realistic scene. They went and painted from their own imagination, and did not try to capture a scene realistically anymore. It isn't intended to express a feeling. Symbolism, in the context of modern art movements, symbolism was an artistic and poetic movement using symbolic images and indirect suggestion to express mystical ideas, emotions, and states of mind. And Cubism, an early 20th century style and movement in art, especially painting, in which the perspective with a single viewpoint was abandoned and made of simple geometric shapes. Art Nouveau, a style of decorative art, architecture and design prominent in Western Europe and the USA from about 1890 until the First World War, characterized by its intricate linear designs and flowing curves based on natural forms. Abstract art, relating to or denoting art that does not attempt to represent external reality, but rather seeks to achieve its effect using shapes, colors, and textures. Surrealism, a 20th century avant-garde movement in the art and literature, which sought to realize the creative potential of the unconscious mind, for example, by the irrational juxtaposition of images. And lastly, graffiti, writing or drawing scribbled, scratched, or sprayed illegally on a wall or other surface in public space. So, yeah, these terms are how the historians and art critics, art theorists try to give definition to a period, a place and time where artists were working in a community on coming up with a unique style of art reflective of their community. So, every community, every generation has its own, set of ideas, philosophies, preferences. They are trying to challenge what comes before, and sort of advance the collective project of improving art or giving something new to the world, something to art. The purpose of art, again, modern artists were constantly challenging the definitions of art and the function of art, what art is intended to do. Some people believe that art is intended to be appreciated for its beauty and for the technique of the artist. Modern artists would say art is anything that provokes a feeling in the person perceiving it. So here we have a map of Europe. Note we have France, we have UK, we have Spain, we have the Netherlands, we have Russia, we have Italy. In our previous lesson on Impressionism, we looked at the French artists exclusively. In this lesson, we will be looking at artists from the UK, France, Spain, the Netherlands, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Russia, the United States, and Mexico. And again, like if you are interested in this topic, please stick around until the end of the lesson, where I will post the link to the study group where I send the notes for you to reference later. And if you would like to know more about these artists and art movements that I'll be talking about tonight, you can also do a search on these galleries, which will have some pages showing what's in their collection. So these are the most important modern art galleries in the world here. Galleries devoted to modern art. We have the New York Museum of Modern Art. We have the Guggenheim Art Gallery. There's a few of them. The Art Institute of Chicago. We have the Musée d'Orsay in France. We have the Picasso Museum in France. We have the Van Gogh Museum in the Netherlands and the Picasso Museum in Spain. In the UK, there's the Tate Institute, and then in Russia, we also have the Moscow National Art Museum, Pushkin Museum, Tretyakov Gallery, and Hermitage Museum. So these are some of the most important art museums where the original paintings of many of these artists are kept. Okay, so let's watch this video sort of describing Cubism. It's a particular style of painting, but this video helps us understand what Cubism meant as like a historical period. So I'm just going to load up this video here.
The Cubist movement challenged age-old artistic styles and rejected conventional ideas. These artists wanted to revitalize art so that it would be more in line with the modern age. They would go on to create the first abstract style in modern art. The Cubist movement reached its creative peak between 1907 and 1914, and it continues to influence artists to this day. At the turn of the 20th century, artists found themselves in a fast-paced and ever-changing modern world. Technological advances, political changes, and dramatic changes within social structures were all happening at this time. Photography was increasingly being used for portraiture and to document historical and everyday events, so it was only natural for painters to turn to other themes. The leading artists of the day, Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, felt that a new artistic style was needed to connect with a modern audience and reflect the struggles of modern life. Inspired by post-impressionist Paul Cézanne, Cubist artists deviated from the three-dimensional perspective that had been the norm in art since the Renaissance. They instead painted two-dimensional figures from multiple perspectives to convey a sense of totality in a uniquely modern way. Cubist artists simplified natural forms into geometric shapes like cylinders, spheres, and of course cubes. The movement got its name from a French critic who, upon viewing Braque's 1908 landscape paintings, commented on the liberal use of cubes. Cubists had a new approach to painting time, volume, mass, and space. Instead of attempting to duplicate images, Cubists attempted to distill the essence of their subjects with abstract forms. For example, instead of painting a breakfast table as a three-dimensional flat surface topped with realistic dishes, Juan Gris' Breakfast depicts a fragmented table, complete with fragmented, multicolored dishes with wallpaper spilling onto both. This invites viewers to contemplate not the beauty or reality of the scene, but the essence or feeling of a breakfast table set with dishes. Common characteristics seen in Cubist paintings and sculpture are the liberal use of geometric forms, distorted and fragmented objects, and multiple perspectives of the same scene. Frontal, profile, and composite or stacked. Paintings in particular were distinguished by their two-dimensional flatness and paper collage. These same ideas influenced early 20th century literature and shaped the styles of authors such as Gertrude Stein, William Faulkner, and Guillaume Apollinaire. Modernist literature drew inspiration from the multiple perspectives and disjointed figures of Cubist paintings, applying similar ideas to their stories through the use of repetition, abstract language, and multiple narrators. Many Cubist paintings feature musical instruments and sheet music, highlighting the significance of music in these artists' lives. Igor Stravinsky's music mirrored the innovations of visual Cubist art with its chaotic ragtime rhythms. In 1913, when America's first modern art show was held at the 69th Regiment Armory on East 25th Street, the public was scandalized, surprised, curious, shocked, and interested in equal parts. One of the pieces displayed at this show was compared by former President Roosevelt to a Navajo rug in his bathroom. This piece, Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, was already in the eye of a storm, since it had received some scathing criticism from many other Cubist artists, including Duchamp's brother. However, the movement would gain popularity and acceptance gradually as a result of subsequent art movements. Pablo Picasso was one of the most influential Cubist painters and is often credited with inventing the Cubist style. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was one of the major works to inspire the movement. If you look closely at this painting, you'll see that the women's faces look like abstract African masks. In fact, Picasso was heavily influenced by masks from sub-Saharan Africa, and his work took on a primitivist character. Primitivism was the idea that non-Western people were closer to nature and more sensual. The masks and figures were a common feature of earlier post-impressionist art. Another influential Cubist painter was Fernand Léger, whose abstract figures are particularly colorful. His 1919 painting, The City, foreshadows futurist art with its stress on the relationship between man and the machine, and the harshness of the modern metropolis. The City depicts a juxtaposition of city scenes such as metal beams, highways, pipes, and flights of stairs, all seen from multiple perspectives and drawing viewers' eyes to each chaotic element. Cubism was a radical deviation from the art of the past and received its share of scathing criticism. The majority of the public simply did not understand what the fuss was about, but no matter how controversial this artistic style was, no matter how many people criticized it, Cubist art has established itself firmly. The innovative perspectives, the completely different techniques, and the stunning outputs that resulted ensured that Cubism became a part of our artistic heritage, inspiring such outgrowths as Futurism, Constructivism, Dada, and Surrealism. Cubism was the most influential artistic movement of the 20th century.
Okay. So yeah, if we reference the timeline again, we see that Impressionism happened around 1816, and between that time you had, Impressionism lasted for about 30 years, and Post-Impressionism. The next movement following that was Fauvism or Expressionism. But there's a lot of similarities between Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and Expressionism in terms of the artist attempting to depict a scene that is fairly recognizable. We can say that later modern artists, like the Impressionists, were incredibly talented, professionally trained artists out of art academies. If they wanted to, they could paint in the classical style, and some of them did, in addition to their Impressionist works. The Expressionists that we're about to look at painted more in a primitivist style, or childlike. Oftentimes when people look at works of modern art, they say, this looks like something my child painted, or that a 2-year-old painted, right? This is kind of what the artist was attempting to do. They wanted to try to capture the essence of the subject, the person or thing or place, from this very primitive place, let's say natural. So artists wanted to convey the primal, deep, inner feelings of humans without all of the formality and convention and society imposes on people, right? Artists were trying to help individuals reconnect with their true selves. This was the idea prominent. This was the influential idea of this time, that people needed to reject the conventional ways of being imposed on individuals through education and society at large, and reconnect with their inner selves as sort of the gateway to being liberated, being free, being sort of reborn. This is the secular humanist ideology. So this is what the modern artists, the expressionists in particular, were trying to do. Cubism, on the other hand, um, is more of a technique, playing with perspective and lighting and geometric shapes. Okay, so let's continue here. We'll look at Henri Matisse. I apologize about the. Maybe you've seen this painting before. This is one of Matisse's greatest works, and you can find, Matisse is quite a very, even today, Matisse is quite an influential figure in the arts world. Graphic artists, Matisse was able to, let's say, use lines to draw the human form or draw a scene in a very simple, simplistic way, right? Taking away all of the detail and just using line and color. As you can see in this particular painting, you just have blue and green, and that's the background, and then you have these dancing figures. There's a whole lot to analyze if we look at these paintings for a very long time. And Henri Matisse is sort of considered the first artist to break from the Impressionist styles. You had Gauguin and Cézanne and Seurat, I suppose, really challenging to come up with a new modern style. And then you had Matisse to be like the very first of the expressionists. Okay. So French painter Henri Matisse was regarded, along with Pablo Picasso, as one of the artists who influenced the future art movements the most. He experimented with the pointillist style. We talked about Seurat and the pointillist style in the last lesson. His works are known for their intense colors and dark lines. He and his contemporaries worked to create the Fauvist art movement, which was more expressive, emotional, and colorful than the Impressionists that came before. I should mention also that satire and irony plays a very important role in understanding modern art. In other words, there is kind of a political message or a satirical message in a lot of these works. So using bright colors and simple shapes is a way of making art fun. And that's what these artists were trying to, provide for the world. Some amusement, some fun, some levity, some color. This is the dance. Here are some other works by Matisse. Again, this is something done in the pointillist style, using little dots of color. He didn't do much of this. He's better known for this. And as you can see, you can see where Picasso got his inspiration. So yeah, it's childlike, and very colorful, and simplistic, and two-dimensional, and primitivist. Like you had native or indigenous non-Western art. Matisse was a French painter. He was influenced by native, indigenous, non-Western art, and he brought that into Western art. So you can say that non-Western native art really changed Western art after, in the 20th century. Moving on to Edvard Munch, a Norwegian artist. Munch spent the majority of his career in Germany and is therefore considered to be influential in Germany's expressionist movement. So another expressionist. Notice the difference in color, however. Matisse and Munch were expressionists. Some say Munch was a symbolist as well. Expressionist and symbolist artists strive to infuse their works with imagery, color, and subject matter that conveys deep emotion. So Matisse, bright and colorful and playful. Munch, quite dark and pale and somber, serious. Munch suffered from mental illness and anxiety, and this is expressed in his works. His best-known work is The Scream. So you've probably seen this painting before. This is Edvard Munch, The Scream. And a little bit like Van Gogh, with the wavy lines, but less attention to detail, and more of a focus on, I think, people as the main subject matter. Like with Van Gogh, it was nature. He did do portraits, but yeah, you could say that there are parallels between Edvard Munch and Vincent van Gogh, and they came from a similar area in Europe. Klimt, Gustav Klimt, Austrian artist, a symbolist artist, who earned his fame and career for his portraits and landscapes, done in his own unique style. Yeah, notice how in this painting you've got these out-of-place little patches, these interesting swirling designs, and you do see a face, and if you use your imagination, I guess you can interpret this as a woman being hugged or embraced by a man. That's kind of what I see when I look at it. I think that's what he was painting, but it's all obscured, right? He's using a technique of, I suppose, like confusing, overwhelming the viewer with all of these patterns. So this came before Picasso and the Cubist movement. So a unique style of painting. He used unconventional materials. In other words, some of this is painted and some of this is plastered on, put on. Like he used gold leaf. He would use other types of material and stick it on in ways that would be considered unconventional. That's called collage, by the way. His most remarkable works deal with erotic subject matter or depictions of couples in loving embraces. Gustav was commercially successful, so he did these works for consignment. These are portraits intended to be sold to the patron, the person who would ask for a painting. So Gustav Klimt was a successful artist in his day. And he painted basically what his patrons wanted. So you have a lot of portraits and you have a lot of these erotic paintings that would go up in the homes of wealthy people. And so it's quite visually stimulating, confusing, overwhelming, I think. Complicated. Interesting to look at, I think. Yeah. Impressionistic, certainly. At least this is. Pablo Picasso, a Spanish artist, and regarded as perhaps the most famous artist of the 20th century. Throughout Picasso's career, he painted in different stages. So in his early career, he painted in the Impressionist style. He later founded the Cubist style of art. From that video we saw, it was Duchamp who came up with that interesting painting called the Nude Descending Down the Stairs. Duchamp worked in all kinds of different artistic styles, probably unintentionally. He just was a very creative individual. Picasso liked the Cubist style and stuck with it. So cubism, like that video says, it experiments with geometric shape, experiments with looking at a subject from multiple perspectives simultaneously. So this is more of his early work done in the Impressionist style. And then Cubism. If you use your imagination, you might be able to recognize, in the picture on the far top left, those are musicians. You can kind of make out eyes of three, you can make out three faces. A lot of people, when they look at that, think of a band. There seem to be three people standing beside each other, and then the rough shape of a guitar in the middle. You can also see the one below that. Seems to be a woman holding a small guitar or a lute or something like that. And then you can see another one beside that, the bottom right, seems to be another shape of a woman. So this is Picasso. Here's his most famous work, La Guernica. I can't pronounce that, I'm sorry. And this is a depiction of the Spanish Civil War. Not very happy at all. Looks like a scene, well, it's a scene of the Spanish Civil War, basically. And you see all of these people screaming. Let's move on to Frida Kahlo. A Mexican artist, Frida Kahlo. Important for popularizing local artistic styles or native folk art. So she came from Mexico. She later went to Europe, visited Europe, and had exhibitions there. Her work consisted mainly of self-portraits and landscapes of the Mexican rainforest. Some of her works are heavily influenced by surrealism as well. We'll look at a surrealist painter later on, Salvador Dali. So during her lifetime, she achieved some success as an artist through the exhibitions that she hosted in France and New York in the 1930s. Her work was rediscovered in the 1990s. So there was a period of time where nobody really paid any attention to Frida Kahlo. Until the 1990s, some art historians rediscovered her paintings, published a few books about her paintings, and she became an international cultural icon. For feminism, she's one of the few female artists. There are many female artists, many female modern artists as well. But she seems to be the most recognizable, the most influential nowadays. But for many years, she was obscure. Okay? But I think everyone can recognize Frida Kahlo's self-portraits. She's become a symbol of modern art, an icon in modern art. Okay, this is Alphonse Mucha and the Art Nouveau style. So, it mentioned waving lines, intricate patterns. Alphonse Mucha was an important painter, illustrator, working in the Art Nouveau movement. So again, through modernism, through industrialism, architecture changed. People's lives in terms of how they furnish their homes changed. The living environment changed. The time and effort put into crafting buildings and furniture was lost to mass production via the factory. Architects were looking to build larger, more robust structures cost efficiently. You also had sort of the political ideology of government centralization and mapping out cities in particular zones, like an industrial and a commercial zone. And the people living in these, living through this, um, were affected in a, personal, emotional, psychological way. And so art was rebelling against this move to eliminate um, um, like human expression for mechanization and industrialism. Art Nouveau reflects sort of a peak in 20th century, 1920s, 1930s. America had become quite decadent, and this influenced architecture, music, um, theater. It was a great decade. And so Alphonse Mucha was a Russian artist and a commercially successful illustrator. So his art, he did art. He did designs for posters for theatrical performances. So this is the Art Nouveau style as far as painting goes. A short period, but still an important, influential one. And here are some of his paintings depicting Russian mythology, I think, or Slavic, I should say, Slavic mythology. The Slav people, Eastern European. Okay, another Russian artist, Vasily Kandinsky, and the first or the most well-known abstract artist. Russian artist and theorist Vasily Kandinsky, considered to be the pioneer of abstract art. So abstract art. Kandinsky fled his motherland after the Russian Revolution for Germany. Kandinsky fled his motherland of Russia for Germany shortly after the Russian Revolution. Then the Nazis took over in Germany, and he spent the rest of his life in France. He devoted his life to nurturing the art community, helping to set up art galleries and museums. He was a strong believer in art. He believed that art and music was deeply spiritual. In addition to painting, he also wrote books and articles on the subject of art theory and analysis. So, interesting uses of pink and yellow and purple and these dark lines. Quite beautiful. Simplistic, certainly. But I like the colors. Especially this one. And this is non-representational art. So, playing with lines, playing with geometric shapes. Abstract art. Jackson Pollock, American painter, a major figure in the American abstract expressionist art movement. So there are, in addition to each of these artists mentioned, that I've mentioned tonight, dozens of other artists belonging to each of these art movements that if you want to look into, you might find some works that you like. So Jackson Pollock produced his works by laying his canvases horizontally. As you can see, he laid his canvas on the floor, and then would, by standing above it, dip a paintbrush into a can of paint and just splatter it, or even just drip it on. He might just pour the paint on and then smooth it over, and then start layering, layer upon layer upon layer. He might go through 2 or 3 cans of paint per painting, and some of his paintings were very large too. um, to see one of these works in a gallery is quite an experience, because they're 2 meters in height, some of them, and they take up an entire wall. You're quite small compared to one of these paintings. Um, and yeah, it's really just paint splattered on a canvas. So what was the artist trying to do? Well, his paintings are described as random and chaotic, completely unpredictable. However, his choice of colors can convey a sense of emotion and satisfaction to audiences. In fact, nowadays, in the 21st century, we have an eye for this. We have an innate appreciation, I think, for this, you might call it texture, artistic depiction of texture. Pollock was very successful as an artist, selling many of his works at high prices. One of them sold to the price of up to 200 million. So, yeah, the way in which he would splatter the paint created the effect of action or movement. You can see the line of paint, swirling about, fluid. So, what the paintings are said to represent, or capturing the artist's movement, capturing movement. So the viewer can study and analyze the lines and how they move. So there's a lot to look at here. When you look at it, at first glance, it really just looks like maybe the shop floor, an artist's shop floor where paint has been spilled. But this is an intentional work of art, and if you were to study it, if you were to just look at it for a long period of time, your mind would begin to notice the individual colors and the patterns. We have an innate ability to recognize in random, chaotic lines patterns and discernible objects. So the longer you look at these, the longer that people looked at these paintings, the more they actually liked them and wanted them, wanted them in their homes, because it was what we could call decorative art. Art Nouveau and this abstract art is decorative art. In other words, it was intended to be used to decorate the home or public spaces, offices. So here we have Jackson Pollock, American abstract expressionism. Okay, Salvador Dali, the surrealist artist. Spanish artist Salvador Dali was a surrealist painting known for his technical skill. He was a formally trained artist, deeply influenced by Renaissance-era art, also known, and also by modern-day impressionists. Dali didn't invent surrealism. However, he has become the best-known and central figure of the surrealist art movement. So if you were to look up surrealism, you might be shocked. I would say surrealism is one of the ugliest of the art movements of this era. Tends to be dark, pale, earthy colors, and they tend to be quite disturbing in, I don't know, I would say the word is deforming, maligning, defacing, I can't quite remember the word exactly, but distorting and um, yeah, I can't quite remember the word. Uh, Taking the human form, human body, and um, um, distorting it, basically. Quite a violent form of art, uh, a violent style of art. Anyway, Dali's paintings and other artworks attempt to capture the dream world. So sometimes it's a nightmare. His paintings are unashamedly personal and bold in their depiction of deeply emotional and disturbing imagery, yet moderated, oftentimes with intricate geometric figures and calming desert landscape. So um, the surrealists were a kind of nihilist group. Um, their intent was really to creatively destroy art, I guess, to make ugly and disturbing images to shock. Dali is considered to be, of that group, but because he was a classically trained and very, very technically skilled artist, he was able to moderate this style of painting with something that's actually beautiful. So here we have, it's, symbolic. What's characteristic of Dali's paintings is they tend to take place in a desert, and they always seem to be in a dream, right? So, yeah. Salvador Dali there. Okay, M.C. Escher, Dutch artist. M.C. Escher made mathematically inspired prints through the use of woodcuts. So he was an illustrator. I don't think he was a painter, but he was an illustrator, a graphic artist. He would sketch and then trace onto a wood plate and carve. This allowed him to make prints. And a print is where you carve out the image onto a piece of wood, and then you ink it, and then you stamp it, basically. So through this medium of wood cutting, he was also able to come up with innovative techniques of lighting and shading, and because he was a mathematical genius, also he would take mathematical concepts, these geometric figures, and artistically depict them. Artists like Escher could make prints by sketching on paper and then tracing onto the surface of wood with wood-cutting instruments, like a chisel. Although a very delicate labor-intensive procedure, it allowed the artist to make limited amounts of copies of the same drawing. So Escher was commercially successful. Not terribly widely celebrated in Western art, the Western art world in his day, or he's still not really recognized as belonging to any particular art movement, even today. He's outside of this, but I wanted to include him as an important modern artist. Now, Escher was a genius in his understanding of geometry and patterns. His works feature mathematical objects, visual representations of mathematical concepts, such as symmetry, reflection, non-hyperbolic geometry, infinity, and tessellation. If you really study this drawing here, you can see the artist is holding a sphere, and this is reflection. You can see that in the middle, this is what it would look like to be looking at a ball, a reflective ball. This is reflection here. But what's interesting is the distorting of the lines, the way in which a globe, a sphere would reflect that. And so he replicated that drawing. I believe this is called a tessellation or a a dodecahedron. Sorry, I'll have to find out what that's called, but it's a kind of a shape of triangles within triangles, or pyramids within pyramids, and then you have a couple of chameleon lizards inside. He was inspired by lizards for some reason. So these are prints. As you can see, he would carve out the pattern of the lizards, one lizard, and then he would copy that. So what you see is one lizard, but copied again and again and again in perfect symmetry. And then he would make different kinds of prints using different colors. So you can see lizards, we can see horses, we can see people, there are insects, butterflies. He also worked on these architectural images. These are called impossible spaces because I suppose three-dimensional reality is mathematically altered. And so this would have been carved into wood and then printed as well. Some of these anyway. So notice that if you look at the staircase, the stairs always seem to be moving up or down. The stairs, if this was in real three-dimensional, the real world, you can't have a four-sided building with ascending stairs. But at this particular angle, he was able to show that through perspective, what's far away is smaller to us, like through perspective. And because it's smaller, he was able to make an ascending staircase. And then what's close to us is larger, right? So through the angle of looking down, the closest corner is at the lowest point, which allows him to then create another ascending staircase. And then if you look inside, you can see that the length of each of the sides of the building are not. There's something unusual about that. The shape. It seems to be not exactly square. And he created many works playing with this technique, with this idea. People going downstairs and upstairs at the same time. And hands drawing themselves. Hands are very difficult to draw, and so he was able to perfectly show hands from different perspectives, from above and below, drawing each other. Okay, this is Alex Gray. Alex Gray, maybe unknown to most people who didn't live through the 1990s. Alex Grey was very, very important in the 1990s because his works were featured on the album covers of some very popular musical groups of the day. So Alex Grey is a contemporary artist. He's one of the artists still living today, and he's certainly one of the more important artists. He became widely popular in the 1990s when his works began to be featured on the album covers of several musical bands. So he's an important artist, and he's a very talented artist. And his subject matter seems to be spirituality, I can't pronounce that, I'm sorry, Vajrayana Buddhism, so meditation, transcendentalism, spiritual images, and he was very talented, or is very talented at depicting human anatomy. Right, you can see the musculature, and the skeleton, and the organs. Right, getting a glimpse of inside the human body, but then he would also infuse that with spiritualism, showing that we are flesh and blood, organic, living creatures with a soul. And through this form of meditation, one could achieve, or perhaps drug use, I don't know, one could achieve these states of being where one could perceive light and color, living, intelligent entities from another dimension. And the use of geometry, sacred geometry. Okay, and I believe we have our last artist for tonight. Banksy. Banksy is a pseudonym. Banksy is an anonymous England-based street artist, political activist, and film director who has been active since the 1990s. He's anonymous because he's a graffiti artist. Graffiti art is art done illegally on public spaces. So it's not like he can come out and announce who he is, because then he would have to pay for property damages. And perhaps serve some jail time. He is his satirical street art and subversive epigrams combine dark humor with graffiti executed in a distinctive stenciling technique. A stencil is where he would a little bit like Escher, he would make a design in his studio, and then he would cut that out, probably in a piece of plastic. And then he could lay it quickly on a wall and spray paint. That's called a stencil. You can make T-shirts and other kinds of prints in this way. Posters and T-shirts, and you basically design the stencil in such a way as they have the light and the black, and then all you have to do is just paint over it, and you have a print. There's a political and social commentary to much of his work, not all of it, but a lot of it, satirizing and critiquing authoritarianism. He was a peace activist. So Banksy has a documentary called Exit Through the Gift Shop, and it debuted at the Sundance Film Festival in 2010. Let's look at some of these works. Hopefully you've seen some of these before. So we're going to finish off this episode with a video talking about the life of Banksy, and then that will be the end of it.
Banksy is perhaps the most mysterious and subversive artist alive. He started making graffiti as a teenager near Bristol, UK in the 90s. Much of his graffiti is still visible from this era, and the town has taken measures to keep it intact. From there, he began a meteoric rise to the poster child for the budding international street art movement. After several hugely controversial works, a much-lauded documentary, and an increasingly devout cult following, Banksy has become a household name. This means that his works are traded for huge sums of money, even though this is in direct contradiction with his own ethos. For background, Banksy is a fully anonymous artist who displays his art on publicly visible surfaces such as walls and self-built physical prop pieces. He has painted graffiti on the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and other public spaces, leading to both outrage and admiration. Over the years, his graffiti has captured the public imagination, and he remains a counterculture idol in many social circles. Banksy does not sell photographs or reproductions of his street graffiti, but art auctioneers have been known to attempt to sell his street art on location and leave the problem of its removal to the hands of the winning bidder. But all this fuels the omnipresent question: who exactly is Banksy? Over the years, several different people have attempted to unmask Banksy, an obsession that seems to have gripped the world. There are many theories spanning from the lead singer of Massive Attack to visual artist Thierry Guetta. Some believe that he is an artist named Robin Banks. In January 2015, a British teenager claimed that a man introducing himself as Robin Banks gave him a print signed by Banksy on a train in Oxenholme, England, after the young man helped the artist pick up paints that fell out of his carry-on bag. Banksy reportedly told the boy that the picture was worth £20,000 or $24,000. YouTube user Mia S. claimed she caught Banksy in the act after filming a man purported to be the elusive street artist in Melbourne, Australia. The video shows a bespectacled man in jeans, a dark jacket, hooded sweatshirt, and watch cap. She confronts the graffiti artist in the video before he tells her to fuck off and flees the scene. But of course, this sighting was impossible to confirm, and obviously, a sighting is not the same thing as an identification. In the HBO documentary Banksy Does New York, the Canadian media artist Chris Healy claimed that Banksy is in fact a team of 7 artists, led by a woman. He maintains that the leader is a blonde woman who appears in scenes depicting Banksy's alleged studio in the documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop in 2010. The theory remains plausible, only insofar as it hasn't been disproved. But the most likely answer is that Banksy is a Bristol-based artist named Robin Gunningham. Criminologists at London's Queen Mary University used a technique called geographic profiling to identify the street artist as Bristol resident Robin Gunningham. Geographic profiling is a sophisticated statistical analysis technique used in criminology to locate repeat offenders. The researchers looked for a correlation between 140 artworks in London and Bristol attributed to Banksy and 10 commonly touted names purported to be the elusive street artist. Robin Gunningham, who was born on 28th of July 1973, is a graffiti artist from Bristol and is out of touch with his family. Banksy lived in a house in Easton, Bristol, around which much of his work can still be seen, for 10 years around the late 1990s. In 1994, Banksy checked into a New York hotel using the name Robin. Banksy moved to London around the year 2000, as did Gunningham. In 2016, lawyers acting for Banksy commented on a scientific study identifying him as Gunningham, but did not suggest that the paper's conclusion were in any way flawed. In June 2017, DJ Goldie referred to Banksy by the name of Rob. Even if this is his true identity, representatives from Banksy's camp have never confirmed or denied the allegations. Beyond this, very little is known about Robin Gunningham, as he has been estranged with most of his family and childhood friends for decades. Audience interest only increased when he compounded his own mystery and released a documentary in 2010. This highly divisive movie entitled Exit Through the Gift Shop claimed to be a documentary about Banksy, but turned out to be a self-referential piece that spoofed the art industry as a whole. Essentially, the film studied the overnight sensation of Thierry Guetta, aka Mr. Brainwash, who had no discernible artistic talent, but made multiple multi-million-dollar sales by leveraging the faults in the art industry. Banksy has said in interviews that editing the film together was an arduous process, noting that, "I spent a year watching footage of sweaty vandals falling off ladders. And the film was made by a very small team. It would have been even smaller if the editors didn't keep having mental breakdowns. They went through over 10,000 hours of Thierry Guetta's tapes and got literally seconds of usable footage out of it. Producer Jaime de Cruz wrote in his production diary that obtaining the original tapes from Thierry was particularly complicated. The world premiere of the film Exit Through the Gift Shop occurred at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah on the 24th of January. He created 10 street artworks around Park City and Salt Lake City to tie in with the screening. In February, the White House Public House in Liverpool, England was sold for £114,000 at an auction. The side of the building has an image of a giant rat by Banksy. In late January 2011, Exit Through the Gift Shop was nominated for a 2010 Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. Banksy released a statement about the nomination stating, "This is a big surprise. I don't agree with the concept of award ceremonies, but I'm prepared to make an exception for the ones I'm nominated for. The last time there was a naked man covered in gold paint in my house, it was me." Leading up to the Oscars, Banksy blanketed Los Angeles with street art. Many people speculated if Banksy would show up at the Oscars in disguise and make a surprise appearance if he won the Oscar. In the end, Exit Through the Gift Shop lost to Inside Job, and no one ever discovered Banksy's identity. However, he is well known among other counterculture celebrities, all of whom seem to be good at keeping a secret. In 2015, Banksy launched his largest exhibition yet, with the help of many famed artists, for a bemusement park called Dismaland. Dismaland was a temporary art project constructed in the seaside resort town of Weston-super-Mare in Somerset, England. Prepared in secret, the pop-up expedition at the Tropicana, a disused swimming pool, was a sinister twist on Disneyland that opened during the weekend of the 21st of August 2015 and closed permanently on the 27th of September 2015, 36 days later. Banksy described it as a family theme park unsuitable for children. Banksy created 10 new works and funded the construction of the exhibition himself. The show featured 58 artists of the 60 Banksy originally invited to participate. 4,000 tickets were available for purchase per day, priced at $3 each. High demand for the tickets to the exhibition caused the Dismaland website to crash repeatedly. Some wondered whether or not this was deliberately contrived by Banksy as part of the irony of the Dismaland experience. The exhibition featured some of the biggest names in counterculture art, including Bill Barminski, Julie Burchill, Jimmy Cauty, Darren Cullen, Al Teenan, Damien Hirst, and Jenny Holzer. Many celebrities were attracted to the venue, some international, such as Brad Pitt, Jack Black, Neil Patrick Harris, Nicholas Hoult, Wayne Cohn, Russell Brand, Ant and Dec, Mark Ronson, Darren Criss, Daddy G, CGP Grey, and Brady Haran. Additionally, the exhibition proved to be popular with visitors, with many prepared to queue for hours each day for one of the 500 daily walk-in tickets. It brought in 150,000 visitors from around the world, boosting the local economy of Weston-super-Mare by 20 million. After this, Banksy was mostly silent for a few years. Though his paintings and wheat pastes continued to go up all over the world, they didn't receive the same headlines that they had in the past. The art public began to assume that Banksy was still operating in the same way. Thus, his artwork was no longer provocative in the same way. And it was no secret that Banksy was not a fan of the massive commercialization of his paintings. Of course, he benefited from certain sales, but so much of his art is sold secondhand or on the black market. To give an example, the most expensive Banksy piece ever sold is a canvas entitled "Keep It Spotless." Auctioned on February 14, 2008 during the Sotheby's charity auction in New York. The amount of money paid for this piece of urban art caught everyone by surprise, making it the most expensive Banksy ever, sold at $1.7 million. Executed in spray paint and household gloss on canvas, Banksy's Keep It Spotless, created in 2007, was originally Damon Hirst's painting, which was defaced by Banksy. It depicts a spray-painted Los Angeles hotel maid, Leanne, who is pulling up Hirst's piece to sweep under the painting. Most artists would be thrilled to sell a piece for this much, but for Banksy, it was just another problem with the bloated art industry. This all that came to a head recently when Banksy created one of his own paintings to self-destruct in the event of an auction. On Friday, October 5, 2019, Sotheby's auction house sold a painting by Banksy for $1.4 million. The piece was a copy of one of the artist's most famous works, an image of a girl releasing a red balloon, and moments after it was sold, the painting self-destructed, shredding itself while onlookers watched. In a video, Banksy explained that he had secretly installed a shredder in the frame of the painting titled "Girl with Balloon" to destroy it if it ever went up for auction. The anonymous artist is known for creating satirical and subversive political art. and by shredding the painting, he essentially turned the auction itself into a work of art. Quoting artist Picasso in an Instagram post, "The urge to destroy is also a creative urge." Sotheby's described the painting as framed work, spray paint on acrylic on canvas, and notes that it's the first time in auction history that a work of art automatically shredded itself. It's certainly a long simmering plot, and it seems unlikely that the shredder and its power source would have remained a secret for so long. The painting itself was a 2006 reproduction of the iconic image, which features a girl releasing a red balloon. The original image was spray painted on a building in East London in 2002, although it was covered up for many years before it was removed in 2014 and sold at an auction the following year. Other copies of the painting have been auctioned over the years. This launched Banksy back into the spotlight and actually serves to make his paintings even more valuable. The identities of the buyer and underbidder, both of whom were bidding anonymously by telephone, remain undisclosed. Sotheby's said in an emailed statement on Sunday that the successful buyer was a private client who was as surprised as we were, and with whom we're still in discussions. The auction house added, "We had no prior knowledge of this event, and were not in any way involved. The ever-elusive, ever-intentive Banksy has once again made a fool of the art world and captivated millions. But has the joke itself slightly self-destructed? Banksy's remotely shredded girl with balloon was meant to poke fun at the excesses of the auction market. Yet, thanks to the huge amount of publicity generated by this ingenious prank, his prices look set to soar even higher." "It was a brilliant PR stunt," said Offer Waterman, a dealer in 20th century British art, who attended Sotheby's Friday night contemporary art auction but left before the sale of the Banksy. "It's going to elevate his prices." Mr. Waterman is among those who think the Banksy sold at Sotheby's has increased in value post-shredding. "It's become worth more as a conceptual moment than as a work of art itself," said Mr. Waterman, who believes that Sotheby's had no knowledge of the stunt. They didn't know. There was no reason for them to know. And Banksy's works have already been augmenting in value over the years. That 40-inch high example of Girl with Balloon, acquired directly from the artist by the present owner in 2006, according to Sotheby's catalog, set a new auction high for a work solely created by Banksy. One of the smaller 20-inch high edition paintings of Girl with Balloon sold in March for £344,000, or about $500,000, at Bonhams in London, according to the ArtNet price database. Mr. Andipa said that back in 2006, he was selling these smaller edition paintings for £30,000, or about $55,000 at the time. There was also something strange about the video Banksy posted on Saturday on his Instagram page. Drawing 6.3 million views by Sunday morning, the video purported to show the artist secretly building a shredder into the painting a few years ago. If that were the case, wouldn't the battery in the shredder have to have been replaced at some point? This, in turn, poses the question, was Banksy himself the owner who entered this stenciled painting, which may or may not have been made and framed years ago, into the sale? Sotheby's, like all international auction houses, does not reveal the identity of its sellers, unless specifically requested. And what about the identity of the man in the sales room who remotely activated the shredding device? Could he have been the elusive graffiti gorilla himself? This just proves that Banksy is still sharp and incisive, with a knack for offending the exact people who then buy his artwork for millions. We haven't heard the last of Banksy, and we're excited to see what tricks he has up his sleeve next. Leave a comment down below on who you think Banksy really is. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like. And below on
Okay. So, thanks for sticking around. We went into overtime tonight, and this is the end of the modern art series. Excuse me, just a second here. So we did cover quite a lot, and if you would like to get the lesson notes that I always post after the recording, just join this WeChat group. Yeah, so the lesson notes as well as the worksheet will be available there in a day or two. If you have any questions, you can also comment, reach me here.